just private sector companies from the US or from Europe. More than 50% of all the companies that have committed to support Power Africa are African companies. I think that that is probably incredibly rare when it comes to initiatives that the US government has initiated. But it's incredibly significant and hopefully really bodes well for the future. So once again, private capital is integral to meeting the needs of energy in Africa. Not only should that private capital be coming from the US, Europe, Asia, but really it could come from Africa itself. And I really look forward to telling you more about how Africans are continuing to develop projects and invest to really bring energy to the continent.
Mr. Consul General, I don't want to butcher your name again, so I'll wait till you pronounce it, and then I'll use it.
Okay, thank you. And my name is George Munyimanyi, and I'm the Consul General for South Africa. Let me just start by thanking the organizers of this conference this evening. I think it comes at a very opportune time, given the fact that Africa is pretty much on the cusp of really joining the rest of the world in terms of economic development. And I think this is quite significant because it is happening at a time when a lot of focus is beginning to fall more and more on the African continent, given the fact that the economic growth has been quite substantive, particularly over the past 5 years or so. Now, in order to sustain the types of economic development that we want to see and the upliftment of lives on the African continent, you surely need energy investment to a large extent to make sure that we can continue to drive the type of investments that we want to see going into the African continent. Now, this has been, to a large extent, quite an impediment for growth, given the fact that if you just look at the figures when it comes to electrification within the African continent, in comparison to the rest of the world, they don't really look good at this stage. And we know that as Africa, we're not attracting the right amount of investments, to actually try and meet the type of growth or the type of demand that we want to see, particularly if we're to double the amount of people who are receiving electricity within the African continent. I mean, just to throw maybe a couple of figures, I think with the exception of South Africa, for instance, the entire size of electricity that goes onto the African continent, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, is about 29,000 gigabytes, which is quite small. That's the size of Argentina, if you were to think about it from that perspective. If you were to look at the inflows of investments going into energy, I think over the past few years we've received about roughly $600 million into energy projects on the African continent, when in fact we need about over $20 billion per annum going forward. Now, this should be coming from not only domestic investments, but it should be coming from the private sector and from other investments everywhere else. Maybe I will just conclude by saying that we know that the continent is quite well endowed in terms of the abundance of fossil fuels and and renewable resources for generating energy. I think the trick really lies into how do we actually invest into really turning these resources to generate the type of energy that we require. And in that sense, the Power Africa initiative has really come at an opportune moment, I believe, for the continent. And our efforts are underway to unlock this potential. Secondly, I think it also comes at a time when we should be focusing really on the entire electricity supply value chain, both on the generation, the transmission, and distribution. And I think a good example would be a partnership, coming from South Africa between a U.S. company called Duke and Eskom, who have actually partnered, to actually try and expand, the type of energy projects, that span the 3 areas that I've mentioned, not only in Southern Africa, but throughout the entire continent. And hopefully, during the discussions, we'll talk about some of the projects.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Munyimanyi.